a little bit of background, I lost contact with my dad and his side of the family when I was 17. But until then, from age 9 to 17, every single day after Christmas, December 26th, I would travel from my mom to my dad. So we would fly across the country. We would fly by ourselves, and I would be in charge of taking care of my sisters on that long flight and making sure we landed safely. And then we would spend a week or so with my dad. And then when I was 17 and even going off to college, like, I suddenly didn't have that anymore. And so for me, like, I think that there's still a part of me where I still associate the holidays and the day after and New Year's very much with like going to my dad's place, which, as we've processed together, wasn't always the safest experience. At the same day, I think that there's still this like sad younger daddy's girl in me, which, you know, of course is confused about what I grew up with. And the holidays are a time when I'm kind of like, oh, I kind of miss my grandmother, and I miss my uncle, and I miss my dad. Like, there are parts that I miss about him, especially like, I think when you grow up with abuse from a young age, you know, the holidays are a time where I'm like, well, was it so bad? And of course it is bad, you know, but like, no one tells you that abuse is abuse until you're older, especially when you're growing up with it. I also think that the holidays are a time when I start feeling really depressed because I think about the family that I lost. Like, I lost, you know, just a month ago, my maternal grandparents who disowned us once again, who haven't spoken to us. And, you know, as you know, I recently found out that my dad has 2 new sons who are like a toddler and an infant. And I think about how like he's spending holidays with them. And we used to have these family traditions that we did for almost 20 years, around the holidays, around New Year's, and now he's doing them with them. And I wonder, is he thinking about me? Is he thinking about us? Like, what does he feel like? Or has he forgotten about us? Like, I know that so much of what my dad thinks from, you know, honestly understanding court documents is that he denies a lot of what we went through. And that's really hard to hear, especially as a survivor. But I think that, you know, the holidays are a time when I really mourn the fact that I lost 2 parents. And even though one was drastically unhealthy and unsafe in many ways, there are so many moments that I can look back on where I did really look to my dad as like a hero, as like this artist and entrepreneur and this creative person. And in the naivete of not knowing abuse was abuse, like, there's so much that I miss there. And I think that that's really hard to admit sometimes, of missing someone who did ultimately hurt me in so many ways and hurt the people that I love. So the holidays are joyous in many reasons, for me and so many other people, from the holiday spirit to maybe the people in chosen family we do get to spend time around. But I also think it's a really hard time. Like, it's the time when I feel most triggered and I really feel like the loss of things. And as y'all know, like, I also cope in so many ways with like a bustling work life. Like, I love doing emails. I love meeting with the team. So when we go 2 weeks over the holidays with no team meetings, with no like bustling inbox in my emails, like, that's kind of when I start to freak out. Like, I then like don't have much to distract myself with. And for me, like, my coping mechanisms very much are in like the routine that I have on a daily basis with my work life. So I think for me, like, the holidays can be really fucking hard. Like, suddenly the things that I go to for coping mechanisms aren't there. And the memories that I usually am kind of running away from and aren't associated with the holidays or whatever, like, are there and they're present. So I think, you know, I wanted to show up and be like, holidays are kind of confusing and they're scary. And, you know, as I mentioned, like, I could go home for 2 months, but I made the decision to only go home for 6 days. And that's kind of sad. And I know it's like, doesn't make my family super happy, but I think like after a lot of thinking, and it makes me sad because I really want to spend time with my sisters and my mom. I know that if I stayed there longer than like a week, I would probably really start reaching that depressive, like, out of my routine, and like out of my body too. Like, I think after a week, like, I know binge eating is really, really hard to avoid when I'm home. And so I'm kind of nervous, but I'm also excited, and I'm hoping that I can kind of see my family again, you know, quickly after that. And I think that I wanted to share that because I think I have a lot of like daughter-sister guilt over setting those boundaries for myself, of like knowing that I'm only going to go home for like a week, and know that I'm voluntarily, like, without work being a pressure, like, I'm going to go home. But like, that boundary to set, I think, is really important for me.